to Sarita Kennedy East. And she's taking up the whole screen? Perfect, okay. So when she passed away in 1961, she was the sole heir to most of her family's fortune. And she gave a substantial amount of that land to the Catholic Church. And it wasn't just a monastery or a parish. A substantial amount of her family's 400,000 acre parish in Texas. For reference, Cambridge, Massachusetts is about 1/100th of that size. Over the years, I found the Catholic Church, we don't just hold under this umbrella of an entity that is governed by canon law for the temporal goods. We don't just hold parishes. We also hold hospitals, homeless shelters, monasteries, summer camps, oil wells, and even in places like South America and Lebanon, entire mountain ranges. Furthermore, land and religion, I would say, are the two things that arguably have driven society more than anything else. Our relationship to land and the resources it has, and also our relationship to cosmology. Every time approaching this subject is delicate because I would say we haven't caused more wars between each other as humanity other than these two things. So back in my late teens and early 20s, as a child, I actually grew up in the Rust Belt in Buffalo, New York. And I was working a lot in soup kitchens. And Buffalo, if you're unfamiliar, kind of like Detroit, is full of a huge amount of abandoned properties and buildings, including churches. And when I was with sisters, I saw that we could feed people healthier food. So I founded Grow Up, which is still operating. It was one of the first work-owned cooperatives in the United States, or excuse me, in New York State. And it is growing microgreens, fresh, healthy food in abandoned places within the urban limits of Buffalo. That was established in 2013. Yeah, over a decade ago, and still is growing to today. I was inspired by serving people on the margins with the sisters as I was looking for my place in vocations and understanding that the way that we use and manage our land can enhance every single aspect of our missions and our ministries. But at the same time, when I went out to find what we even owned, I found records that looked like this. Paper folders in basements, often run and managed by an elderly brother or sister, distributed through a diocese. Because of the taxation and accountability within the United States, the Catholic Church hadn't had to, on the diocese scale or even on a religious order's provincial scale, account for their entire property portfolios. We're lucky if we found someone that had an Excel sheet that had all their properties even. We began by prototyping, mapping the Boston Archdiocese with over 625 properties back in 2015, really digitizing their records. It was challenging because actually there wasn't even a unified map of dioceses globally that was digital or analog. And further, the one of dioceses within the United States, as I had reached out to CARE and many other entities, of just the boundaries alone was just a PDF. So what I realized then was this wasn't just about transforming the environmental potential of the church, or even beyond that, the public health potential of the church to serve those with our land, with her mission, but also this was also an operation of digital transformation. Those 625 properties were worth over $3 billion of assets last we checked. Now that was 2016, and a lot has happened since then. Maps allow us to see a complex narrative around us. For example, this app that we developed shows sea level rise inundation based on scientific models and Catholic properties. So if you attend, say, the downtown cathedral in Boston and we don't mitigate climate change, you'll have to be canoeing to Mass at a certain point within the next 50 years. Further, if you think about this, it's really helpful for dioceses. I'm about to be speaking at the Diocesan Fiscal Management Conference to over 200 diocesan CFOs alongside the president of the USCCB. Financial decisions that affect all of us and our ministries that have an urgent need for funding can be kind of thwarted if somebody says, let's restore a church basement in a flooded area that they don't realize, and they invest a substantial amount of money. Being able to make decisions about our property requires location knowledge, not only for better scientifically informed and community-driven programs with the environment and health, but also to make sure the dioceses are financially responsible. Back in 2016, I found myself in Rome looking for that global map of dioceses, knowing that we could scale our projects from one diocese to another if we could just classify them and make it cost effective. Initially, doing a diocesan master plan, having to digitize the records cost about $1.2 million. Not surprisingly, nobody did that. Over the last 8 years, we've dropped it down to 300,000, and with the use of integrated like ChatGPT and enterprise systems development, I think we're going to get it down to around 90,000 in this next year, which I'm very hopeful about. What am I even talking about with this? It's really just about knowing what you have, which is really important, to know what to do with it. Taking your grand check, doing your examen. And so I went to Rome, and I was shocked to find out when I asked for permission, I thought, gosh, the church must have a global map of dioceses. Slim chance it wouldn't be digital, maybe just even hand-drawn. The only thing we could find with students that I'd worked with at Yale for a couple of years looking for this was the Atlas Hierarchicus, which was hand-drawn maps from 1901 in tons of different projections. When I say that, a projection is like why Greenland looks the size of South America, right? That's Web Mercator. Different projections means that that map collection was pretty much fancy hand doodles, and there was nothing that was unified globally for dioceses. I sat down with the Secretary of State because I thought, my gosh, if this map is not public, there must be a very good security reason for this, and I should clear all my work with them if I'm going to move forward, to make sure I'm not wasting time and resources or not breaching some security protocol. To my shock, they hadn't had a map update really since the frescoes were painted on the walls. I then went to, as an invited researcher, to the Esri Applications Prototype Lab, and we developed and launched the first global digital maps of the Catholic Church's ecclesiastical jurisdictions. Additionally, we mapped all Catholic affiliate properties, including religious orders, dioceses, religious foundations, and healthcare systems and beyond within the USCCB with a 91% accuracy based on our initial mapping of Boston and the truthing of that. This was kind of momentous. So you can see this was 2016, Catholic land in the USCCB. This allowed us to tie it together with a green infrastructure project that shows about 100 metrics for every single property in the US. So its soil type, its composition, its relation to different core habitats. Now, this data set is not public for multiple reasons. I've been offered a lot of money to sell it off to real estate companies and have never budged. Kelly can attest, I've been near homeless in parts of this journey. But it's really opened the door to even getting discussions with dioceses or religious orders. At first they said, why do we need to know what we have? Second, why do we even need to have it mapped? And then third, why should you know what I have? And I pulled this up when I've sat down in meetings with bishops over the years and said, if I know what you have, real estate companies can too. And you need to be proactive because we've seen a massive hemorrhaging of assets, especially with aging religious and with the abuse scandals, and many of these assets are sold at quarter market value from communities being completely ripped off. So part of solving our climate crisis or our food health crisis and realizing the potential of our land to good requires helping dioceses and religious communities actually understand what they own and be empowered to not either sell it off below market value and sell it and get the right value and maybe put that into a fund for environment, but also to help them preserve land with conservation, which until the Build Back Better bill, nobody got tax write-offs for, which is amazing. You now get cash incentives to do that. Further, we mapped the jurisdiction of the church. Now, this wasn't a light feat. I had access to a staff of 3,000 to do this. It was 50 people full-time for almost half a year, with experts coming from different fields for the other church provinces. And you will see there was one version of this done on Wikipedia, which is very wrong. I hired the kid who did it. He was 17 at the time. He's part of our team. He's our first intern. We've never had an unpaid intern. They've made more than me at times. You can see there's some gaps because to have a province, you have to have, ontologically speaking, an archdiocese and a diocese. So those areas with gaps here that aren't yellow, those are areas where it's primarily mission territories, apostolic vicariates, etc. And then we mapped the dioceses of the world, almost 3,000 total, which enables us to really look at the church in a totally different angle. And as you can imagine, I've worked with some religious orders on different projects, the Vincentians, the Jesuits, and many of them don't even have digital provincial maps. And so that's a big step forward. This allowed us to see the Catholic Church's footprint and her people around the world. I should note the graphic here, it should say 13,000 something over here. It just got blacked out in the graphics exportation, so excuse me for that, but you can see, we can now see where there's the most Catholics per diocese, for example. North Arabia is very bright here because there's a lot of Filipino kind of migrant workers, which is a nicer term. It's Filipino slave workers, that get imported there, which is its own very problematic issue. I premiered the pre-shortage map showing Catholics to priests at the Amazon Synod. This showed that while we might feel crunched with our pre-shortage in many parts of the world, there's over 10,000 Catholics for one priest. And how can we think about, propagating the faith with these shortages? Further, making maps showing, say, where this one is, where the Catholic Church is a critical non-state actor for biodiversity. So to make a map like this, and you can see we have some dioceses that are ranked, the top 10, we'd say. And I should note, Antarctica is left off this, but Antarctica is overseen by the Christchurch Diocese. And there's 3 parishes there, last I checked. But this kind of map allowed us to take layers of looking at satellite images of where, rainforests and habitats were being destroyed for development. So changes in time. We take one map at one time and consecutive maps, so you can see how the habitat is decreasing, see how dysfunctional government is. So we looked at the data of the fragility of the state. So the state's not going to do much to stop this. We also looked at biodiversity data globally into this, both avian, amphibian, and mammalian, and then also the percentage of Catholics. What that means is these top 10 dioceses where we show the Catholic Church is a critical steward for biodiversity protection are dioceses where the government's too dysfunctional to intervene. There's a huge, rapidly increasing rate of deforestation or habitat reduction. There's massive biodiversity, and it's extremely Catholic. This allows strategic grant making and targeting of programs to support really these urgent areas. Further, we partnered with a team that published this data in Nature Climate Change from the University of Hawaii, which showed different heat waves. This was public for a while. It's not public right now, but the effects of deadly heat waves. So there's on different emission scenarios. We also I've published over 300 maps, data sets about the Catholic Church globally in our GeoHub, which include a carbon footprint of the Church globally. I premiered these maps initially in Rome in 2016 on the Vatican Arts and Technology Council. It was the first time the prelates of the Church had ever seen the global community that they are called to shepherd, even if they do not do it perfectly. But it was kind of a momentous occasion. And in 2018, Pope Francis personally gave me permission to start an institute in Rome for cartography. I'm renegotiating that now, so prayers welcome. It's really important for the policy side of this work, for all of our work, if we use any sort of geospatial data. While we've mapped in the US, I've had requests from the East African Bishops' Conference and beyond, and we really need security protocols coming out of the Holy See. I would say any sane person would never try to work with the Vatican unless they had something seriously relevant to the global church that deals with policy or doctrine, and that's the only reason why I'm there. I was offered a 30,000 euro budget to stand up the entire country's Geography Institute, so renegotiating, I'm hoping. And why it matters is you'll see a lot of numbers out there, and they're all wrong. And sometimes, unfortunately, though I tell journalists not to, nobody really knows how much land as a collection, as a network of communities we own. But I would probably know better than anyone given my mapping work. And I can very safely say, back of the napkin analysis, it's larger than France and Spain combined. For example, there are many things most people don't know about, like patriarch for the Maronites coming to be kind of freaking out because priests were giving away entire mountainsides because they own most of the mountain ranges in Lebanon. 2,000 years of Cerritos. So we know about all these parcel scale changes that we can make to help our community health and our environmental health, from renewable energy to regenerative agriculture to something as simple as tree planting, which data comes out, it seems like practically every day in studies, decreases violence, increases physical health, mental health, air quality, and beyond. We have all these parcel scale solutions, but it's really, really important to scale it up to a diocese or a province or region. For example, if you're going to plant 50 trees on a semi-rural parish, and this is why I kind of brought in this approach, was because we saw the people doing Laudato Si But the people that weren't in crisis mode, running parishes and monasteries and communities in, say, really poor neighborhoods with people just that needed clothes on their backs and food in their mouths and childcare and all these things. And it was a very privileged perspective. And the thing is, if you get the one parish that isn't in crisis mode planting 50 trees in a semi-rural area, it's going to have thousands of times less impact on your watershed health and on your community health than if you plant 15 trees in an urban area with no urban forest canopy. So being able to look at an entire property portfolio and drawing in these layers of analysis shows us where you can make the best kind of impact for your change, and coordinate together as well. For example, the person doing tree planting might actually benefit from a no-mow situation or a different planning situation. Or, a big example would be the Sisters of St. Joseph approached me years ago and they said, we're freaking out, these sisters, and because they had this 40,000 acre property and it was gorgeous and they were ready to conserve a significant portion of the parcel with the Nature Conservancy, and the provincial superior was about to sell it. And they just did not want that. And the reality was no one was a bad guy there. The provincial superior was not looking at a map, did not have an idea of the scientific grounding for their faith-driven compulsion to preserve this land. And she also was pressured to be fulfilling the revenue needs for the religious order for the retiring sisters and their healthcare. If they had had a map of all the properties, they could have worked together to conserve at least pieces of the most valuable parts of that property and identified other properties within their portfolio that were much higher net worth to lease or sell appropriately. Further, there's the work I do with the Holy See on the global scale, and that's really about the policy side that I mentioned, and also things like having a map of dioceses and being kind of the one-woman show running that is very not right. I need canon lawyers and stuff, so if bishops have, because I'm the authority for now ecclesiastical jurisdiction boundaries, if bishops have a dispute, I need canon lawyers and stuff. So I'm trying to get that in and house that in the Holy See. There's also a huge product market for map products with the Vatican stamp. As a National Geographic Explorer, the market's over $100 million a year renewable, considering the size of Catholic education. If you can get the Vatican stamp on it, it will be much higher negotiations for royalties. And I'm hoping we can do that to fund an institute we've started there, but also make a significant fund detached from family offices, which is a huge thing, detached from family offices for Catholic environmental work. There is way too much corruption in the property and way too many people that have profited off of the sale of Catholic land below market value that are Hiltons, Rowan Horse, etc. And it is not the only reason, but it's definitely a reason why scientifically grounded, conservation and environmental work in the Catholic space is not funded. I just learned this past week that Faith Invest, which was one of the only ones that one of these big foundations had, committed 10 years to, in the faith and environment space, Porticus just pulled their funding 3 years in with no warning, and they had to let go of most of their people. So there really is almost no funding in this space. So I think a lot of us kind of higher up or have been in this space for a long time are in discussion of the need for an independent fund for all of our work. It's not $50,000 grants. I mean, the space really needs, 9 figures to be able to not only understand where to put things, but how to do it in an informed way, and the return makes sense. If you plant a palm tree in Alaska, for an extreme example, it won't live. If you put your environmental programs in places without understanding the environment, it's not acceptable. And a lot of people in the faith and environmental space do not have scientific backgrounds to just understand that basic fact. You have to understand the environment before you do environmental programs. And you have to understand that organizations like Nature Conservancy, the biggest environmental ones, have hundreds of millions of dollars in their budget. Largely, it's been driven by revolving real estate funds, which don't work with an institution like the church because of tax incentives, but also that you need scientists to track and understand the programs and the accountability. There's hundreds of thousands of wetland scientists around the U.S. that's job is to delineate wetlands. And you can easily find where they need to go with maps. If you aren't even talking about this or talking about soil or sun or aspect, and you're just trying to go forward, you're kind of like a blind person wandering. So an example of a diocese scale kind of fully ecological plan would be something like this. Your typical suburban parish property right outside of Buffalo, New York, and the ability to transform that property for both. There's no Mo sites on this model, community kind of like a playground and a soccer field, which generate revenue. So you can, with computers, actually model how much revenue you'll generate without having to hire a landscape architect or anything like that for these initial drafts. Obviously, if you're doing grading and things, you do need stormwater management, so figuring out how much water they can divert, food agricultural allotments in the part of the site that didn't have any toxic soils, so no need for remediation there. And also, adding trees. Trees can reduce heating and cooling costs by up to 30 to 40% if they're placed in the right locations, based on the EPA has a bunch of documentation about research done about that. So there's a lot of potential for our land, and it's so much more than one thing. But we need to understand so much more beyond each individual site to make sure that we do what we can and have the most impact with the resources that we have. So being able to look at one site in the context of an entire portfolio and seeing where the opportunities are the highest, where you can actually finance programs for health and for homelessness and for environmental work, which all relates directly back to our properties. And so we ended up, starting about 8 years ago, we built a machine learning model. So we classified all the Catholic affiliate properties in the United States based on their type, their current usage, the community's history of land use, since we have access to a nationwide assessors database, and the size and different environmental aspects. And through that, we have tied in solutions over time for migration and aid, and also ecology and food security. And each time we do another project, these models get better. Now, when we work with a diocese and have to update that 2016 data set, or if we work with one not in the US where we did that for R&D, they own all the data, or religious order, they own all the data, with the exception of like working with my students at Columbia. Columbia owns the data then, university, not the country. But so it's really important to realize that, being able to optimize, say, where you put food allotments, et cetera, based on land use and history. So being able to scale out allows us to take these models and reapply them into dioceses, say a diocese class A, diocese class B. So if we do a model for tree planting in somewhere in California that has a Mediterranean climate with certain characteristics, that might be applicable in Italy or Greece, right? But if you do a stormwater management assessment for diocese and somebody in Africa is contracting you and you have no paved surfaces there, it doesn't make sense, right? Another big thing has been looking towards crisis dioceses. So dioceses where there's high levels of political conflict or inward migration or outward emigration due to things. And also the conflict would be, say, if a diocese in Somalia, and this has happened to us before, it like comes to us and is like, we want to work with you on, say, a regenerative agriculture project or something. We have to say, first, we don't have the capacity right now for the security needed for that data set, because a data set showing all the churches or monasteries in some of these places would be very risky for anyone. And also, second, that's something that belongs in the territory of Jesuit refugee services or Catholic relief services. There's different modes of operation, and say if you have a lot of people migrating to a spot in a diocese, that's a place where you really should immediately think about food security, housing security, entrepreneurship and jobs, etc. Whereas if you have a place in, say, Europe or the US where the Catholic population is going down, that's where you should be thinking about conservation and strategies that can make it a financially viable legacy solution for your community. So it's really important to look at that big picture. Forgive the typo here with Barry. There's actually a couple typos. But feed the hungry. We're called to do this, and it requires, getting land, food from land. To shelter the homeless requires having a shelter and a place for them. Burying the dead requires property and land use for it. Clothing the naked uses tremendous resources from our earth, and also we need to figure out better solutions for supply chains and the dumps of waste that are populating huge swaths of land and ocean at this point. to visit and heal the sick, we should think about not making people sick in the first place. If we look at the wealth of how ecosystems restoration and land management impacts the quality of life and health of people around the world, it's our duty as Christians to make sure that we aren't perpetuating toxic systems that destroy our watersheds and our soil health and our community health. To visit the president is a bit more of a stretch, but once you have all the data in place, you can do a lot of analyses of transit, and also to give drink to the thirsty. It's really important to make sure that they have a clean water source. Everything that we're called to do in the corporal acts of mercy ties directly back to how we use and manage our land. There's about 1.3 billion Catholics around the world. It's the largest non-governmental network of healthcare, or largest network, 26% of healthcare facilities globally. The largest non-governmental network of education, with over 35 million children in Catholic schools each year. That doesn't include higher education. And also we're the largest non-governmental network of humanitarian aid. I really got into this, wanted to park ranger, and I still do, but I realized there's such a bigger vision here. And I think it's that Catholic conservation and sustainability can reach the scale of all these networks in the next century as the new charism, we could say, that we're picking up.